A mother vanished without a trace while out buying fried chicken. 3 years later, her son stumbled upon something strange in a McDonald's storage room and immediately called the police. From that moment on, a horrifying truth buried for years began to surface, sending shockwaves through the entire town. "Is Mom back yet, Uncle Thomas?" Noah's voice was soft, like wind slipping through a door crack. He stood by the window, clutching a red plastic toy car in one hand, his cheek pressed against the cold glass. Outside, the streetlight cast shadows on the dry maple leaves, swaying in the wind. Thomas looked up from an old magazine, the desk lamp throwing light across a face that had grown tired and hollow after 3 weeks of staying up to watch the kids for his sister. He was Megan's older brother, temporarily living with her, and the kids after her marriage fell apart. A seasonal plumber by trade, Thomas had come from Detroit and helped out whenever Megan worked the night shift. Life wasn't easy, but it had a kind of warmth, built on small routines. Dinner together, bedtime stories, and waiting quietly for the sound of Megan's footsteps in the hallway. He glanced up at the wall clock. She should be home soon. Maybe the line was long tonight. He said it, but even he could hear the doubt in his own voice. The ticking of the wall clock filled the silence, each tick growing louder in the absence of adult conversation. Megan had left the house at 7:40 p.m. Just a quick drive to pick up her kid's favorite fried chicken from the McDonald's about 5 minutes away. But now it was 8:30. Nearly an hour had passed. Before she left, Megan had pulled on her silvery grey coat, tied her hair up neatly, and bent down to kiss her children on the forehead. Noah still remembered the faint scent of her perfume. 2-year-old Lila had been playing with a plastic spoon at the time, babbling something no one could understand. Megan had sung out cheerfully, "Be good for Uncle Thomas, sweetie. I'm just going to get some chicken, and I'll be right back." "Fried chicken?" Noah had looked up, eyes shining. "Yep, the crispy kind. Just the way you like it." Thomas, who had been at the sink washing dishes, turned slightly and called out gently, "Better hurry. Looks like the weather's turning." When Megan left that second-floor apartment, the air was still crisp and dry. She drove through 3 blocks, the streetlights glowing the warm yellow of roasted corn. Before heading to McDonald's, she stopped at the convenience store next door to pick up milk for Lila. Security footage shows her entering at 7:51 p.m., wearing a grey coat, her hair tied up in a high bun. From that point on, no further images of Megan were recorded. At 9 o'clock, Noah was still sitting by the window. He'd stopped asking questions, but his eyes hadn't moved from the sidewalk below. Thomas was starting to feel uneasy. He got up from his chair and paced the room like a caged tiger. At 9:15, he called Megan. The phone rang 4 times, then went silent. He frowned and dialed again. This time, all he got was an automated message. "The number you have dialed is currently unreachable." Thomas turned to look at the front door. Megan's raincoat was still hanging there. On the floor, her rubber boots hadn't been touched. He pulled out his phone and dialed the police just as the clock ticked past 11 o'clock. "My sister went out to get food around 7:30. It's almost midnight, and she's still not back. Her phone's off. No one saw her at McDonald's, and the car hasn't returned. I'm worried something's happened. I was hoping you could help us find out what's going on." The dispatcher's voice was calm, almost as if reading from a script. "How old is she?" 29. "Any history of mental health issues or disorientation?" "Number." "She's responsible. She's got 2 young kids sleeping in the other room." "Sir, by law, an adult can't be considered missing until 24 hours have passed, unless there are clear signs of violence. You're telling me I'm supposed to sit here all night and not be worried? I understand your concerns, sir, but we have to follow protocol." Thomas hung up without another word. He returned to the living room and saw Noah fast asleep on the couch, still clutching his mother's pillow tightly. The boy's eyes were swollen from lack of sleep and from a kind of sorrow he didn't yet know how to name. Outside, the steady sound of rain drummed against the awning, like a spirit being summoned. The next morning, the police called back. Megan's car had been found in the McDonald's parking lot, just a few steps from the main entrance. The doors were locked, her purse wasn't inside, neither was her phone. Security footage from the restaurant showed no one matching her description ever went in. An older officer spoke over the phone. "I understand your concern, but at this point, we haven't found any clear signs of danger or foul play. It's not uncommon for adults to leave for personal reasons. It might sound strange, but we've seen this sort of thing before." Thomas stood frozen. Then he spoke, each word cold and precise. "She went out to buy chicken, and she never came back. No one goes to buy chicken and just leaves 2 sleeping kids behind." His voice was hoarse now, not angry, just worn thin, as if every breath tightened something in his chest. He left the station with a missing person report that promised nothing, just a formality, a quiet acknowledgement that Megan had disappeared and no one found it worth stopping the world over. He began searching, walking streets Megan might have passed through, questioning convenience store clerks, asking neighbors for security footage. But no one remembered anything, not a single witness, not a trace. It was as if the rain that night had washed everything clean. Weeks later, after every call went unanswered and hope settled into a habit of silence, Thomas had no choice but to take the kids back to Detroit. But in his mind, that door never really closed. No one could have guessed that 3 years later, the very place where she vanished would reveal a secret no one had ever spoken aloud. Sunday morning. The sky was still overcast. Fog hung over the rooftops, and traces of rain clung to the wooden railing, dripping softly onto the front porch. The sound of school buses no longer echoed like it did 3 years ago. The maple tree outside the bedroom window had grown taller than the house, but still bore the faded yellow of the days when Megan was here. 3 years had passed. Noah was 8 now, quieter than he'd been even as a toddler who couldn't read yet. He didn't cry, didn't smile, and no longer asked about his mother. Lila often touched the photo of her mom on the dining table and asked, "Where's Mommy, Uncle? Is she cold?" Thomas never answered. He just tied her hair back, set the food on the table, and reminded her, "Eat up, sweetheart." They lived in an old rented house on the edge of town, where Thomas picked up whatever work he could find, plumbing, fixing heaters, and delivering pizzas on the weekends. Life wasn't exactly poor, but it was always stretched thin, tight as a guitar string. No one in town mentioned Megan anymore. Enough time had passed for porch conversations to shift from sympathy to indifference. The news had long moved on, and newcomers didn't know the story. Online, the missing persons post had only a handful of old, scattered comments left. Only Thomas and the 2 kids kept the flame alive, flickering like a candle in a storm. One afternoon after school, Noah's teacher, Ms. Karen, waited for Thomas at the school gate. She was a woman in her early 40s, hair neatly tied back, with the kind of eyes that paid close attention to her students. "Thomas, I wanted to talk a little about Noah." Thomas placed a hand on Noah's shoulder. "What's going on, Miss Karen? He's a good boy, not falling behind in class, but he doesn't talk to anyone, doesn't make friends, often just sits in the back, staring out the window. I'm not saying he needs to change overnight. I just think maybe he needs someone to listen." Thomas gave a small nod. "Thank you. I'll keep an eye on him." That night, Thomas left the desk lamp on and sat jotting down tasks for the next day. Noah sat by the window. He didn't say a word, just held his mother's old hoodie in his arms. Once, as he passed by the room, Thomas saw Noah with his face buried in the hoodie, shoulders trembling. There was no sound of sobbing, only the soft rustle of fabric being squeezed by small hands. Thomas stood there so long he forgot to breathe. Finally, he spoke. "Does it still smell like Mom?" Noah nodded. Thomas looked at him for a long moment, then said gently, "Yeah, keep it close." "Like she's hugging you." The next morning, a small headline in the local section made Thomas pause mid-sip of his coffee. "McDonald's on East Maple, branch number 12, to close for complete interior renovation. Demolition of old fixtures scheduled over the next 2 weeks." Thomas set the paper down. That was the place where Megan disappeared, the place he still hadn't been able to return to. Noah walked into the kitchen, hair tousled, eyes fixed on his glass of milk, like there was something inside it he needed to draw out. "Mum's still there," he said. Thomas looked up. "What did you say?" Noah met his eyes. "At that place. She hasn't gone anywhere." The words were soft as air, but they struck hard, stirring memories. "Do you want to go there?" Noah nodded. "I want to say goodbye." The next day, the sky was overcast, and the McDonald's parking lot lay under a fine layer of dust. A sign taped to the glass door read, "Temporarily closed." Inside, it was dark, like a room forgotten. Thomas led Noah and Lila around to the back, toward the employee entrance. The door was unlocked. Part of the back storeroom, once a maintenance room, still bore the marks of dust and damp. They stepped inside. The air was thick with the mingled smell of old plastic and machine oil, the kind of smell that made people instinctively lower their voices. Noah slowly circled the room, his eyes scanning each corner. He walked to a spot on the floor where a wooden panel had sagged. He stood there for a long while, then turned and said quietly, "There's something under there." Thomas followed his nephew's gaze, frowning. He stepped over, knelt down, and examined the panel. The edges were splintered, the screws loose. He hesitated, then pulled a screwdriver from his pocket and started to remove the fastenings one by one. A musty odor rose up. Beneath the dust, a dark space appeared, a narrow pit, about 5 feet deep. Thomas stepped back, pulling the 2 kids behind him. He didn't say anything, but his expression had shifted. He pulled out his phone and called the police. When the officers arrived, a young one shined his flashlight down into the hole. Thomas was holding Lila in one arm, the other gripping his phone. He was about to speak when Noah stepped forward, right up to the edge of the pit, trembling from head to toe. The boy pointed down, tears streaming down his pale cheeks. My mum's down there." The officer froze for a second. His light swept deeper. A red uniform shirt emerged from the dust, neatly folded, perfectly laid. On the chest, stitched clearly, was the name, Megan Dorsey. Below it, a dark, rust-colored stain had spread, old, dried red fluid. Thomas dropped to his knees, pulling Lila close and wrapping both arms tightly around Noah. The boy sobbed, soundless, like something breaking loose after 3 silent years. No one said a word. Only the sound of muffled crying filled the cold, cement room. The shirt had no dust on it, as if someone had just placed it there. And beneath the wooden panel, fresh footprints, untouched since 3 years ago. The wind swept through the row of warehouses, whipping the yellow tape that read, "Crime scene, do not cross." Footprints still pressed into the dust on the concrete floor. The musty smell and lingering chill hadn't lifted yet, even though the early autumn sunlight had begun to stream in. The Lakewood County Police Department officially reopened the Megan Dorsey case after receiving lab results. The DNA sample from the uniform shirt was a perfect match with the medical records on file for Megan. This was no longer a missing person case. It was now a criminal investigation. Lieutenant Bannon, the officer who had handled the original file, let out a long sigh as he turned the brittle, yellowing pages. "We shouldn't have closed it so soon," he muttered. But now it was no longer his responsibility. Someone else had been brought in from the State Bureau, investigator Karen Bell. Karen Bell, 51, was a former FBI agent who specialized in cold cases in the Northeast. Her face was sharp-featured, her graying hair tied low. Her eyes held a patience that bordered on icy. She didn't care for idle talk, and she didn't believe in gut feelings, only in facts. On her first day at the scene, Karen stood in the middle of the equipment warehouse, staring down at the tarp-covered, sealed-off pit. She said nothing, just methodically took notes on every detail. The red fluid's dry. No drag marks. The victim might have been eliminated here, or led here first. Thomas had been asked to come in and restate his entire testimony. In the interview room, the cold light fell across his face, weathered and darkened from years of outdoor labor. Thomas sat still for a long time before speaking. His voice was hoarse and thick with emotion. 3 years ago, my sister disappeared. Nobody believed something had happened. The police said she left on her own, but she would never leave her child, not without a word. Karen sat across from him, her hand resting lightly on a notepad. She didn't interrupt. She let him finish. Thomas continued. At the time, I tried to get them to check the security cameras, to look into the co-workers on her shift. But they said there was no sign of a break-in, no indication of force, not enough grounds to open a criminal investigation. Why not? Because Megan was an adult. They said maybe she needed some space, or had decided to leave. They treated it as a personal matter. No one wanted to dig into something that wasn't clearly a crime. Karen jotted something down in her notebook, then looked up. So back then, did you suspect anyone? Thomas answered without hesitation. Ricky Hale, night shift manager at McDonald's. He had a problem with Megan. She told me he tried several times to push her out of her position as shift supervisor. He'd pressure her, talk bad about her to the higher-ups. I never believed workplace drama could escalate that far. But something about him always made me uneasy. The kind of guy who's all smiles when people are looking, then kicks you when your back's turned. Megan once joked, "If anything happens to me, look for Ricky first." I laughed at the time, but thinking back now, it's not funny anymore. Do you have any proof? Number but Jenna, Megan's co-worker, might know something. She saw a lot. Once I overheard Megan talking to someone on the phone, maybe Jenna, but I couldn't catch what she said. Karen marked Jenna's name on her list. She started sketching out the old staff chart, mapping the connections around Megan during her final shift. Jenna, now working as a cashier at a gas station 10 miles away, walked into the interview room hesitantly. Her eyes were sunken from lack of sleep, and her hands wouldn't stop ringing. Karen didn't press her, just asked, 3 years ago, you were on the same shift as Megan? Jenna nodded. Night shift. Me, Megan, Troy, Sandra, and Ricky. The shift manager. Did anything unusual happen? She hesitated. Ricky and Megan argued a lot. I remember once, I heard Ricky say, "Who do you think you are, trying to run the night shift?" Megan didn't say anything, but I could tell she was scared. Karen tilted her head. Did she ever confide in you? Jenna bit her lip. After a moment, she said, yes. One time, after our shift ended, Megan stayed to help me clean up. I went to the back to take out the trash and found her sitting behind the storage area, crying. She told me Ricky had threatened to make sure she disappeared from here forever if she didn't stay out of management business. Karen stopped writing. Her eyes bore into Jenna. Why didn't you say that earlier? I was scared. Ricky was close with the sheriff back then. I was just a part-time employee. I didn't think it would go this far." Karen gave a small nod. In her mind, a timeline was beginning to take shape. What she didn't know was that the steps she was taking now would lead to something much bigger, a truth that had been carefully buried for 3 years, just waiting for the right person to uncover it. Night fell quicker than usual. In a small house tucked away on the southern outskirts of town, Ricky Hale sat in front of a silent TV, holding his third beer. Outside the window, the street lamp cast a dull glow over the tall, uncut grass, lighting up patches of peeling wall. He lived alone. No dog, no cat, no visitors. The only sounds in the house were the soft clink of the beer can tapping the table, and a faint sigh from a man both tired and alert. Ricky hadn't turned on the main lights, just left the faint yellow glow from the kitchen. His shadow stretched long across the worn wooden floor, warped and uneasy. Karen Bell hadn't called ahead. She showed up with a local officer and knocked gently at 7:20 p.m. Ricky cracked the door open, frowning. His face was sun-worn, his shave uneven, and his eyes looked like they were always half ready to dart away. "Mr. Hale, I'm Investigator Bell. We need your cooperation with an old case. Megan Dorsey. Do you remember her?" Ricky glanced over his shoulder like he was worried someone might be listening. He nodded, then opened the door wider to let them in. His gait had a slight limp. Karen made a note of that. The house was a mess, filled with a musty smell mixed with cold food. The picture frames on the wall hung crookedly. Some had cracked glass that hadn't been replaced. On the table sat a nearly empty pack of cigarettes and a bottle of sleeping pills. Karen didn't sit. She stayed standing and opened her notebook. 3 years ago, you were the night shift manager at McDonald's, is that right? Yeah, but I wasn't working that night. We still have the timesheets. You were there." Ricky paused for a second. His face changed. Then he shrugged. Might have been a mix-up. I used to swap shifts with the kids." "Did you ever have any conflicts with Megan?" "Number just some arguments. Normal stuff. Happens at work." Karen looked at him for a moment. "Some co-workers say you raised your voice at her, even threatened her." "They're lying. I didn't do anything." His voice began to tighten. His eyes avoided hers. Karen noticed a faint scar on his right hand, running along the curve of his wrist, like the mark of an old scratch, long healed. She asked, "Where'd that come from?" Ricky rubbed his wrist. "Fell while gardening. Easy to get hurt like that." Karen said nothing more. She simply nodded and asked to review his old payroll records. Ricky looked annoyed, but didn't object. As she left, she glanced back. On the desk, an old picture frame lay face down. She didn't ask about it, but she remembered. That evening, back at the station, Karen sat alone in the data archive room. She powered up the projector, rewinding footage from the technical storage area security camera, the older model that had supposedly been out of order. A grainy image flickered to life, 9:12 p.m. A man stepped into the storage room. His face wasn't visible, but the limp in his walk and the cut of his jacket matched exactly what Sandra had described Ricky Hale wearing that night. Karen replayed the footage several times. With each pause, she jotted down notes. Every gesture, every step, the distance covered. The only sounds in the room were the low hum of the projector and the soft scratch of her pen against paper. One man, one room, one rainy night. A secret that had slept for 3 years. The next morning, Karen went to the old records room. The scent of aged paper still hung in the air, and light from the window caught the dust on the metal filing cabinets. She pulled open the third drawer, flipped through time cards, and stopped at the entry for October 7th, the night Megan disappeared. The name on the log was clear. Ricky Hale, clocked in at 5 p.m., signed out at 8:45 p.m. The ink was crisp, no sign of tampering. But the security footage Karen had just watched proved otherwise. 9:12 p.m., Ricky was still on site, wearing the same coat, that unmistakable limp. She frowned. If he'd clocked out at 8:45, how could he have been inside a restricted area almost 30 minutes later? Or had someone helped him cover it up? Was it an honest mistake or something deliberate? Her finger slid down to the verification column. The name beside the signature read, Sandra Long, Administrative Staff. Sandra's final note in the adjacent file read, Resignation effective October 8th. Just one day after the disappearance. Karen sat in silence for a moment. Someone signed him out, and then left the job the very next day. Too neat to be coincidence. She wrote Sandra's name on the interview list, circling it in red. This woman might be the next missing piece, or the only one left who truly remembers what happened that night. Sandra had once said she left McDonald's because she moved, but her new address was only 15 minutes from the old one. And in her statement 3 years ago, she never once mentioned signing Ricky out. So the question remained, what does Sandra know? And what is she hiding? The fluorescent lights in the second-floor meeting room of the Lakewood Police Department shone with a cold, metallic glare. The space was sealed tight, iron chairs pressed close together, and the air felt thick with silence. On the wall hung a whiteboard covered with a personnel chart of the downtown McDonald's, each worn face marked with red notations. Karen Bell stood at the head of the table, a printed case file in her hand. She knew this morning wouldn't be pleasant. 4 people sat across from one another, Jenna Clark, Kyle Evans, Troy Hammond, and Donna Reyes. All had worked the night shift during the month Megan went missing. Each wore a different kind of frown, a different kind of unease. Jenna, blonde hair neatly tied back, around 30, was the first to speak when Karen broke the silence. I know this isn't easy, Karen said, but I'm asking for your cooperation. The truth needs to come out. We'll speak to each of you individually. Jenna, would you mind staying? The other 3 stood. As the door closed behind them, Jenna remained still. Karen poured her a glass of water and said gently, I want to hear about Megan and Ricky Hale. Was there ever anything between them? Jenna took the glass, her hands trembling slightly. I don't know everything, she said. But one night, after Megan and I finished cleaning the kitchen, Ricky called her into the storage room. He yelled, loud, like screaming. When Megan came back out, her eyes were red. She didn't say much, just whispered to me, You steal my title, I'll steal your damn mouth. Karen looked up. Who said that? Ricky. She said he threatened her. But Megan was too scared to report it at the time. I asked her about it, but she just shook her head. Said she had 2 little ones at home. If she lost her job, how would she feed them? Probably figured no one would believe her and didn't want to stir up more trouble. Karen wrote down every word, then asked, And what happened after that? A week later, it happened. Karen nodded. She thanked Jenna, then called in Kyle Evans. Kyle, tall, short-cropped black hair, eyes a little unsure, sat down, fingers interlocked. I wasn't close with Megan, but I remember one time, the 2 of them had a huge argument. That was a week before she disappeared. Ricky wasn't happy about Megan getting nominated for shift lead. Felt like she'd stepped over him. He blew up right there during the shift. I was wiping down the counter and had to step back into the kitchen. I was scared. Karen tilted her head. Do you remember what exactly he said? Something like, if someone like you can move up, then what the hell am I supposed to do, huh? Did anyone try to stop him? Troy pulled him back. Troy's the assistant cook, mid-30s or so. He was right there when Ricky started yelling, only one who had the guts to step in. But after that, Megan didn't say a word. Just silent. Scary kind of silent. She came to work the next day like nothing happened. Karen scribbled quickly in her notebook. She asked more questions about that shift, what time they left, anything unusual. Kyle couldn't remember much. I just remember Megan seemed tired. Took her purse out to the car real early, but the car stayed in the lot all night. Next was Donna Reyes, the cleaning lady. She was in her 50s, spoke slowly. I remember Ricky. He was always over the top. One day he took a mop and slammed it against the metal shelf in the storeroom, shouting when he heard Megan got picked for shift lead. I was in the break room and still heard it clear as day. Was he ever violent? I never saw him hit anyone, but there was something off, like he could blow at any second. Every time Megan walked in, it was like the air got colder. Karen sat in silence. What she was hearing gradually pieced itself into a kind of map. Lines of tension, small but persistent collisions, and in the end, a break. She opened McDonald's internal records. In the email folder, a message from Megan to the branch manager appeared. Sent on October 3rd. I don't feel safe working with night shift manager Ricky Hale. There have been signs of personal threats and verbally offensive behavior. Please take note and look into this. There was no reply. The last status line read, Read. Karen printed the email and added it to the evidence file. She exhaled, her chest heavy. No one had listened to Megan back then. No one thought anything serious could happen. And now, it was too late. At the end of the day, she cross-checked the time log from October 7th. It still showed Sandra Long's signature, noting Ricky clocked out at 8:45 p.m. But Jenna remembered Ricky lingering around the counter past 9. Kyle confirmed seeing him take something from the storage room. Donna swore she heard the back door open around 9:10. Fragments of memory, slowly starting to fit together. Karen closed her eyes and pictured it. A woman no one believed. A man wounded by the loss of his position. A team divided by resentment. And one night, when no one was really watching each other, the wooden house sat tucked away among the old pine trees at the far edge of Lisle County. Early winter wind whistled through the rusted tin roof. A worn chimney still puffed a thin line of smoke, a sign someone was inside. No one lived nearby. The closest neighbor was nearly a mile away. Marcus Velasquez, his name nearly scrubbed from every personnel file, was living here now. The former McDonald's branch manager at the time Megan disappeared. Detective Karen Bell and Thomas Dorsey parked about 6 feet from the sagging wooden gate. There was no doorbell. Karen knocked with her knuckles 3 times. No answer. She knocked again. A faint sound came from inside. I know you're in there, Mr. Velasquez. I'm not here to accuse you. I'm here because of Megan Dorsey. Silence. Then, the door latch clicked open. Marcus appeared, much older than he looked in the photo taken 3 years ago. His beard was patchy, his eyes sunken. He stared at them for a long moment, then stepped back into the house without a word. Karen and Thomas followed. The house was still as a grave. On the table lay a folded newspaper, yellowed with age. Karen was the first to speak. I think you know why we're here. Marcus sat down without offering them a seat. You probably want to know why I did nothing when I got the letter accusing Ricky. Karen nodded. Thomas remained standing, his hand clenched into a fist. Marcus let out a long breath. I read it, that very night. But I thought Megan was overreacting. Teams always have minor tensions. I figured they'd work it out themselves. Karen said nothing. Marcus lowered his head. I didn't think Ricky had it in him to eliminate someone. But I did know he could make someone disappear from a shift. The words dropped into the room like a lead weight. Thomas lunged forward, nearly grabbing Marcus by the collar. "You bastard! My sister came to you for help. And what did you do? Ignored her?" Karen stepped in, placing a hand on Thomas to hold him back. She turned to Marcus. "Did you know about the utility storage in the back?" Marcus nodded. "I did. That door's always locked. But on October 8th, I got a report about a foul smell coming from the storage. I didn't check, I just signed off on sealing it. They said it was a dead rat." Karen pulled out a notebook. "Did anyone go into the storage that day?" Marcus looked away. "Yeah, Ricky. Said he needed to grab some equipment. Nobody checked on him. No one thought twice about it." Thomas turned his back, eyes red. Karen jotted everything down. Marcus stood, walked into the kitchen, and poured himself a small glass of wine. "After that day, I asked for leave. I couldn't take the way those kids looked at me when their mums didn't come home. I wasn't fit to be a manager. I wasn't even fit to be a man." Karen closed her notebook. "Will you sign a written statement confirming what you just said?" Marcus nodded, his voice breaking. "I kept quiet, and that silence is what eliminated her." That same afternoon, an old silver car pulled up in front of the Lakewood police station. Troy Hammond stepped out, wearing a baseball cap, his eyes tense. He'd heard through an acquaintance that the case had been reopened. Without waiting for a summons, he showed up on his own. "I'm Troy Hammond. I used to work as a line cook at McDonald's. I want to talk to whoever's in charge of the Megan case." Karen came out to greet him in person. As they sat down, Troy spoke quickly, almost as if afraid something would vanish if he didn't say it fast enough. "I remember that night. Ricky didn't leave with the rest of us. He said he needed to stay behind to close the books, but no one ever saw him doing any of that. When I went back to grab my jacket, I saw the storage room door cracked open and a flashlight beam inside." Karen listened intently. She tilted her head. "Why didn't you say anything 3 years ago?" Troy swallowed hard. His voice dropped lower. "Because I was scared. The day after, someone left an anonymous threat in my locker at the staff changing room. 'If you talk, no one's going to find your body, just like that girl.' I couldn't say a word. I was just a kitchen assistant back then, on a temp contract. My mum had a heart condition. I couldn't afford to take any risks." He looked at Karen, his eyes like someone who'd just stepped out of a long, dark confinement. "But I can't stay quiet anymore. Megan doesn't deserve to be forgotten like that." Troy's statement was the final piece that confirmed Ricky had returned to the storage room after hours. Meanwhile, across town, Ricky Hale had just stepped out of a liquor store. A bottle of bourbon hung from his hand, his eyes glued to his phone, where a local news site flashed the headline, "Police confirm new evidence in Megan Dorsey case." He froze. His grip on the bottle tightened until his knuckles turned white. His right wrist, the one with the old scar, trembled slightly. Ricky hurled the phone onto the back seat of his car. His face went rigid, his jaw twitching. He breathed fast and shallow, like a man trapped. And in his eyes, it wasn't just panic. There was something else. Fear. Or was it rage? He sat there, motionless, for a long moment. Then the engine roared to life, and he sped off like he was running from something gaining on him. Mid-October evening. The air was crisp. Thomas's small kitchen glowed with warm light, carrying faint scents of roast chicken and biscuits. At the table, Lila was coloring an oil pastel picture. Noah sat beside her, but wasn't drawing. He was quiet, eyes fixed on the window, watching for the car that was about to arrive. A vehicle pulled up in the driveway. Jenna Clark stepped out. She wore an old denim jacket and clutched the strap of her handbag tightly. She'd hesitated for 3 days since leaving the police station. But tonight, she couldn't keep silent any longer. Thomas opened the door. The anger he'd shown at the station was gone. What remained was fatigue and caution. Jenna stepped inside and took a seat in the armchair, her hands still clenched. "I can't keep this inside anymore," she said, her voice raw. Karen wasn't there, just Thomas, the two children, and a truth that had waited 3 years. That night, I was working the night shift too. I saw Megan go into the back storage room. She said she was grabbing extra towels and cleaning supplies, but she never came back. Thomas's hand tightened on the armrest. Noah kept watching, his eyes wide. About 10 minutes later, I saw Ricky coming out from the back. He was drenched in sweat. His hands were covered in something dark, like oil, or something else. I asked what happened, and he just said, "It's cold in the storage room. Smells awful in there." Jenna paused, taking a deep breath. And I heard something. A sound, like something heavy hitting the floor. Hard. But I didn't check. I was scared. I knew something wasn't right, but I thought, if I just stayed out of it, I'd be okay. She bowed her head. Her voice broke. But I was wrong. I left Megan in there. I didn't protect my friend. Jenna sank to her knees in front of Noah and Thomas. I'm sorry I stayed silent." Noah didn't answer. He walked to his room, but on the table he left behind a drawing. His mother standing in front of a McDonald's. A black hand reaching from the ground, pulling her down. Thomas couldn't hold back his tears. That very night, Thomas called Karen. Jenna's indirect testimony was the final piece Karen had been waiting for. "We have a witness who heard a heavy object fall and described the suspect's strange behavior," Karen told her superior over the phone. "Along with the DNA traces, the anonymous letter, and the security footage evidence, I'm requesting a warrant to search the house and excavate the technical storage area." 10:12 p.m. The warrant was signed. The police team mobilized immediately. The old McDonald's site was cordoned off again that night. Yellow tape stretched across the perimeter. Police lights lit up the corner of the street in a flashing blue-red blaze. In the back, inside the technical storage area, the forensics team had started digging beneath the basement, right where a portion of the wooden floor had sunken in. 5:32 the next morning. A voice rang out from the hole. "Found her!" Everyone rushed over. A small figure curled up at the bottom, her body thin and pale, eyes shut. But her chest still rose and fell faintly. A doctor scrambled down. "She's alive! Megan Dorsey!" Thomas froze. Jenna burst into tears. Noah quietly peeled Lila's hand off his shirt and ran toward the edge of the pit. "Mom!" Police called for an ambulance immediately. She was lifted out on a soft stretcher, severely dehydrated, her lips cracked, her breathing shallow. Karen walked beside her, eyes locked on Megan's face. How did you survive down there for 3 years?" Megan's eyes fluttered open, just barely. She whispered, "Someone gave me water, food, never saw their face, only heard their voice." Megan was rushed to Lakewood Memorial Hospital in critical condition. She was placed in isolation, constantly given fluids and oxygen. Thomas waited in the hallway all night. Noah sat beside him, holding onto his arm, eyes fixed on the door. 3 days passed. Megan began to recover. She could sit up, whisper, though her voice was still frail. On the 4th morning, Thomas brought Noah into the hospital room. The boy clutched a worn, stuffed dinosaur. Megan turned her head, her eyes still unfocused, but the moment she saw her son, they lit up with a faint spark. "Noah!" Her voice broke into a breath. Noah stepped closer and sat beside her bed. He was silent for a moment, then softly asked, "Does it hurt, Mom?" Megan gave the faintest nod. Tears welled up at the corners of her eyes. "I'm sorry for not coming back to you." Noah leaned his head gently on her hand. "I kept drawing pictures of you every week. I knew you didn't just leave." Thomas turned away, clenching his fists. Megan lifted her thin hand to stroke Noah's hair. She whispered, "You've grown so much. I love you." Mother and son held each other close. They said nothing more. The hospital room was silent, as if the world itself had paused to give them this moment. Doctors said it was almost impossible. She hadn't died from infection or full-blown organ failure. Somehow, someone had cared for her just enough to keep her alive, but not enough to let her escape. While Megan remained in treatment, Karen and the investigation team began tracking down the identity of the so-called caretaker. They combed through every record tied to the McDonald's location, re-interviewed former janitors, electricians, and maintenance contractors. Then, a small lead emerged. A recurring order, bottled water and protein bars, delivered monthly, paid in cash, signed with a fake name, Charlie Dunn. An odd order, a person who didn't exist in any system, but the warehouse security cameras still had archived footage. Now came the moment to unmask Charlie Dunn, the person who kept Megan alive. But why? Megan survived, but she had no idea who had kept her breathing. A hidden hand, a silent witness, or a silent accomplice. And now, it was up to Karen to uncover the truth. Who kept Megan alive in the dark? ChatGPT Jannoi, Chiothu Sao Giobon Moi Haifutoi. Bon se kan sat danglai truok nhariki, mot noinho, xung kap voi mot kuvon bua bon vakwa, sofu buai. He opened the door, looking dazed. Karen read out the arrest warrant. "Ricky Hale, you are under arrest on suspicion of kidnapping and unlawful confinement with intent, endangering the victim's life." Ricky didn't resist. He simply said, "I knew this day would come." Interrogation room. Interview scene. Ricky sat across from Karen. The overhead light was harsh and unflinching. "I didn't eliminate her," Ricky began. "I just wanted to scare her. Put her in her place. Megan always got special treatment. She stole the shift leader position that should have been mine." Karen leaned forward. "So you locked her in a dark cellar for 3 years." Ricky let out a short laugh. "I thought a few days would be enough. But when no one noticed, I felt at ease. No one in my way anymore. I got promoted to shift leader a week later. I felt seen for the first time." Karen tightened her grip on the file. "She had a young child. You knew that, right?" Ricky lowered his head. "I knew. I have an elderly mother. We all have someone, but no one ever saw me as a real person. I've been the weird one since I was a kid. Megan was different. Everyone adored her. I hated that look in their eyes." Karen asked, "What do you want now that you've confessed?" Ricky didn't look up. "Just one thing. Let me see my mother one last time before I'm sentenced." Karen didn't promise anything. She quietly stood up. She knew then. Evil wasn't a demon. It was a person too weak to bear the presence of good. West Lakewood Central Delivery Facility, Wednesday morning. A light fog hung over the tops of the shipping containers, while the early morning sun barely broke through the layer of dust that had settled on the windows over time. A police cruiser was parked at the curb. Karen Bell and Lieutenant Alex stepped into the warehouse's data archive room. Karen stared intently at the screen, showing a short piece of surveillance footage from the delivery facility, dated last March. Just 28 seconds of video before the system had glitched. A tall man in a grey jacket and a baseball cap was pushing a stack of parcels toward the back of the shelving rows. He kept his face turned away, but his limp was noticeable, and a small bandage covered part of his left hand. The camera clearly recorded that he never signed for the delivery, only left the name, Charlie Dunn. "That's a fake name, no doubt," Alex said. "There's no record of anyone by that name in the registration system." Karen pulled out her phone and called Thomas. "Have you ever met anyone named Charlie Dunn?" Thomas was quiet for a few seconds. But the build looks familiar. Reminds me of a guy who used to do maintenance at McDonald's. I remember the way he walked, leaned to the left side. Always wore a cap. Didn't talk much." Karen reopened the old personnel files. After filtering the list of 24 technical workers from the past 5 years, only one matched the description. Walter Jennings, former maintenance and electrical tech at McDonald's Lakewood. He quit 1 week after Megan disappeared. She traced the last known address. Walter was now living in a remote part of Montana where the population was sparse and the registration systems weren't synced. Rural Montana, late afternoon. Karen arrived at Walter's house. A small wooden cabin with moss-covered walls. The door was unlocked. Inside, an old man with a silver beard was slicing stale bread. When Karen introduced herself, Walter didn't look surprised. He simply nodded slowly. "I've been expecting this day." Karen sat across from him, turned on her voice recorder. "Were you the one who delivered food to Megan Dorsey?" Walter nodded. "Ricky told me. Said someone was having a mental breakdown and needed a quiet place to stay for a few months. I owed him, so I agreed. But after a few weeks, I started to doubt the story. No one stays silent in a basement that long by choice. I tried to leave her a note, but Ricky found out." Karen's hands clenched. "Why didn't you go to the police?" "I was weak, afraid of getting dragged into it. But I kept her alive. Every week, I snuck her water and food. Just enough so she wouldn't die." Karen continued. "Did you ever talk to her?" "Yes, but only through the small door slot. She didn't know my name. She just called me the delivery man. One time, she asked me, 'Am I going to die here?' And I didn't have the courage to answer." Karen left Montana, carrying with her the testimony and voice evidence captured on an old audio surveillance device. It was enough to authorize the arrest of Ricky Hale. The next day, Megan fully regained consciousness. She held Noah's hand and recounted the dream that had cloaked her in darkness for 3 years. Karen stood by the hospital window, watching the sunlight stretch in slanted beams across the surface of the lake. And she knew justice had not been asleep. But there was one thing Megan hadn't told anyone. She wanted to see Ricky. A week later, at the county jail, Megan was granted a supervised visit in the inmate meeting area. The room was cold, sterile, the kind of silence that hummed just under the surface. Walls too clean, too still. She sat down at the table behind the thick glass panel, lifted the phone receiver, and waited. Her fingers curled loosely around the cord, eyes fixed on the door. It opened with a low buzz. Ricky shuffled in, hands cuffed, shoulders slumped beneath the sagging grey of his prison uniform. His face looked older, thinner. The cocky edge that used to linger around his eyes was gone, replaced by something hollow, raw. He didn't look at her, not until he heard her voice. Just one word. His name. Spoken softly, like the first breath of winter air. Ricky. He looked up. His eyes were red, rimmed with exhaustion and regret. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched thin between them, heavy with things that had no language. When he finally found the strength, his voice cracked. I'm sorry." Megan didn't flinch. She didn't lean forward. didn't pull away, just looked at him, steady, unblinking. Her eyes held no fury, no accusations, only a sorrow so deep it seemed to come from somewhere far beyond the walls of that room. "I used to think about hating you," she said quietly. "Every day. It was the only thing that kept me breathing sometimes. But 3 years in the dark, it changes you." She looked down at her lap, then back up at him. "Forgiveness isn't about you," she said. "It's for me, so I can keep living." Ricky's lips trembled. He turned his face to the side, but not fast enough to hide it. His shoulders shook. No outburst, no pleading. Just quiet, helpless tears. The kind that come when a person realizes they've lost something beyond repair. "I don't deserve it," he whispered. Megan didn't respond right away. She just watched him. This man who had once made a choice that changed her life forever. Her face remained calm, but her fingers tightened slightly on the phone. "No," she said, "you don't." And then, softer, "But that's not the point." She hung up the receiver, stood, and walked away, leaving behind not closure, but something harder, something braver, a line drawn, a life reclaimed. Megan gently set the phone down. Before walking out, she turned back. "I forgive you, but I won't forget." On the other side of the glass, Ricky sat motionless, tears slipping down a face hardened by a lifetime of resentment. After that meeting, Megan returned to her hospital room with a feeling she couldn't quite name. She sat by the window, watching the scarlet sunset spill across the lake like dried red fluid. Inside, there was no peace, no bitterness, only emptiness. A hollowness that had stretched on for 3 years, now learning to live in the light again. She remembered every sound, every shadow that passed beneath the door. The footsteps, the smell of cold food, the whisper from a stranger. "You're not alone." But Ricky had never said that. A strange feeling flickered through her. She clenched her fist. Someone else had been there. The first morning of spring, the sky stretched wide and blue, clean as a freshly laundered sheet. A mild breeze drifted through the trees, carrying the scent of damp earth and new leaves. Sunlight, young, golden, hesitant, poured across the red tiles of Thomas's roof, caught on the thin branches just starting to bud, and filtered through the kitchen window, where Megan stood in silence. She wore a pale beige sweater, sleeves pushed halfway up her forearms, the hem falling loosely over her jeans. Her hair was pulled back in a neat twist. In her hands, a cup of ginger tea steamed faintly, warming her fingers and carrying the soft scent of herbs into the room. She took small sips, more for comfort than taste. The kitchen, once a quiet witness to grief, felt changed now. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was gentle, textured with life. The soft scratch of Lila's pencil as she colored at the table. The low whir of Noah's toy car as it circled again and again across the worn wooden floor. No sobs, no broken prayers whispered into the sink. Just the quiet rhythm of an ordinary morning. Earned, not given. 3 months had passed since the rescue. Enough time, some would say, for life to go back to normal. But normal didn't return like a switch flipped. It crept in slowly, cautiously, like light under a closed door. Megan still couldn't sleep soundly. Most nights, the smallest noise, a floorboard creaking, a dog barking down the street, was enough to send her bolt upright in bed, heart pounding. She would lie there in the dark, unmoving, until her eyes found Noah across the room, bundled in blankets, chest rising and falling. Then she would breathe again. Thomas never asked how she was doing. He didn't pry. He didn't try to name things he couldn't fix. Instead, each morning, Before the sun was fully up, he would place a fresh cup of coffee beside her ginger tea on the windowsill, always on the right, where her hand would naturally reach. He never said anything, never needed to. But in that quiet gesture was something steady, something that spoke of respect, of patience, of letting her move at her own pace. It was his way of saying, "You made it, you're still here, and that's enough." Or maybe simply, "Live, and when you can, live happily." The following week, Megan asked Thomas for permission to take a short trip. She went to the nursing home on the east side of the city. The person she wanted to see was Ricky's mother, an elderly woman over 80, living alone, her memory fading in and out. Megan sat in the wooden chair beside the bed. The old woman stared at her for a long time, her clouded eyes flickering with something faint, something half-remembered. "You're the brown-haired girl," she said softly. "Ricky used to mention—" Megan nodded and took the woman's hand. "Yes, but I'm not here to blame. I just wanted to forgive. Not for Ricky, for myself. I don't want my children to grow up in the shadow of hatred." The old woman broke down in tears. And in that room, heavy with the scent of antiseptic, something began to melt. A quiet forgiveness, washing away 3 years of darkness. 2 weeks later, Megan received an official offer from McDonald's headquarters. They wanted her to manage an entirely new branch. This time, they promised transparency, full retraining, and a clearly defined internal oversight system. Thomas got an offer too, technical manager. He would oversee equipment and workplace safety, the very role he had once wished he'd held when everything went wrong. They stood in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound between them. Megan looked at him, quiet for a moment, then smiled. "Does it feel strange," she asked, "to go back to a place that once hurt you?" Thomas took a slow sip of coffee. "It's not going back," he said. "It's rebuilding, on the ruins, stronger." Lakewood held its annual spring festival not long after. During the ceremony, the mayor invited Noah to the stage to receive an honorary certificate, a symbol of bravery, 2025. The crowd broke into applause. Megan stood off to the side, holding Lila close against her chest. She watched her son step up to the microphone, small hands gripping the edge of the podium. His voice was steady, clear. "I wasn't brave," he said. "I just believed Mum would come back." And in the hush that followed, the wind moved gently through the trees. No one stayed seated after that, because in a moment of simple truth, a child reminded the grown-ups of the greatest strength of all: faith. The new branch opened that morning. Megan wore her manager's uniform and a brand new name tag: Megan Dorsey, Store Manager. Beside her stood Thomas in his technician's safety vest. Lila darted around the space, and Noah was busy putting up the menu signs. In the corner near the storage room, Megan had asked to keep an old item, a faded wooden sign that read, "Staff Area, Caution." "I don't want to forget," she said, "not because it hurts, but because it reminds me I survived." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Megan sat on the porch. In her hands was a drawing Noah had made, 2 children holding their mother's hands in front of a brightly lit McDonald's. No shadows, no red fluid, only light. There was no miracle that pulled Megan out of the abyss, but there was family, there was trust, and there was forgiveness. Life didn't go back to the way it was, but it went on, brighter, stronger, because they didn't give up on each other. Maybe the scariest part isn't being left in the dark. It's the feeling that no one even knows you're gone. Megan's story isn't just a tale of miraculous survival. It's proof of trust, of compassion, and the quiet strength of ordinary people who choose to stand tall when the world turns away. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It's how those left behind begin to heal. And what about you? If you were in Megan's place, could you forgive? What do you believe helps a person get through pain? Justice, family, or simply time? And if this story has touched you in some way, hold on to it as a gentle reminder: live. No matter what happens,